Hello, everyone. This is Phil Bishop. I'm president of Infozone Intelligence, LLC. Welcome to our webinar for today. We have a senior Infozone consultant, Rohan Doshi, and he will be talking about field functions, including date, time, and string functions. I'm sure you'll find it quite interesting. And then we will have time after Rohan is done for a Q&A session. So please feel free to use the Q&A panel on the WebEx to enter your questions as you think of them, and then we will address them at the end of the session. Okay, so without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Rohan. Rohan, take it away. Thanks.
Thanks for joining my webinar. My name is Rohan, and I'm a senior consultant for Infozone, and today I'm going to be talking about field, date, and string functions. So let's get started. So with all the functions that I'm going to be talking about today, you could actually use them both in QlikView and QlikSense. So let me get started talking about field functions. So there are two types of field functions. There are count functions and selection functions. And some examples of count functions are getSelectedCount, getPossibleCount, getAlternativeCount, and getExcludedCount. And these all return integer values. And some examples of selection functions are getCurrentField, getCurrentSelection, and getFieldSelection. And they return strings identifying different aspects of field selections. So let's move on to the definition of count functions. So the definition of getSelectedCount is it returns a number of selected values of a field. GetPossibleCount returns a number of possible values of a field. GetExcludedCount returns a number of excluded values of a field. And GetAlternativeCount returns a number of alternative values in the field. Now, if you notice a trend with these definitions, the thing after the get and before the count returns the number of that values of a field. So what exactly does it mean to be selected, possible, excluded, and alternative in QlikView? So QlikView uses this thing called the associated selection model, and it's basically when you make a selection as part of the data model, the data is filtered to only things that relate to that. So when you select something, it's going to be denoted by this green thing. If it's possible in the data model, it's going to be denoted by white. Excluded is gray, and alternative is yellow. So, like I said, get selected, it's very simple. So it just means that you selected something. So in the city of, we have Chicago selected, so we have one get selected. So if we open up a text box and we have getSelectedCount city, this is going to change dynamically based on how many values we have selected in the city list box. So 2, 3. And then getPossible is what's possible. So when you select Chicago as a city, these are the names that are possible right now. So if we change the expression and the getPossibleCount on the name field, that's going to return 7. When we introduce Chicago and LA, you can see that the number of getPossibleCount increases. GetExcluded is actually the very opposite. So when we have Chicago selected, getExcluded are the names associated with Los Angeles and New York. So let's type that in our expression, getExcludedCount. So there's 25 names in total, 7 are associated with Chicago, 18 names are excluded right now. So let's move on to getAlternativeCount, and a good way to visualize alternatives is list boxes have this menu, show alternatives. So now when we make a selection, you can see that the alternative selections are based on this yellow. So if we type that in our expression, you can see that there's 6 other alternative values when we select a name. So let's move on to our second group of field functions. selection function. So there's 3 types of those. And the first one, get current field. The syntax is you have the group name, and it's used to find the current value in a specific group. So I like using this function a lot in captions. So in this current chart right now, I've get current field cycle group. And what cycle group is, it's a cycle that I created with the address, city, state, and zip code fields. So now when we cycle through the chart with the different dimensions, you can see that the caption is now dynamic based on whatever dimension is being currently used. So let's move to get current selections, and what this does, it returns the current selections in the document. So if I pull up the current selections list box and I type that in, get current selections, and then I select a city, you can see that a city is selected. You could select more than one. So Chicago and LA, we could combine names with it. So you can now see that all these names are selected and these cities are selected. And then the last selection function is get field selections, and what this does, it returns a string with the current selection in a field. So let's say we want to see which cities are being selected right now. So get field selection with the city field inside. So now you can see that we have this city selection, we added a city, and then we have all of them. So you could use that. And the thing to note about field functions are that they're only used in the UI because there is no selection state inside of the actual script data model. So let's move on to date functions. And when I talk about date functions, I'm not talking about romantic dates or dates as in food. I'm talking about date and time functions. Now, if you look at the list, you notice that there are quite a few functions built in QlikView. So there are a lot of them. So let's get started talking about some of them. So if you notice, this is a list box with a date field, and if you're probably wondering what this 5-digit number is, so this is how QlikView actually interprets dates. And a lot of times when you have key fields, you want to put them as this value or this format, since a lot of times dates comes in different formats and styles, and you want to be able to look them. So if you notice, a date is being selected, and the first function I want to talk about is actually just a date function. So the date function will make sense of this 5-digit number. So this is actually January 7, 2010. So this is now the same as if you go in your Members tab and change your format to date. You could use that date function to change that. So the next function I want to talk about are the date start and date end functions, and some examples of those are year start, year end, quarter start, quarter end, month start, month end, week start, week end, and day start, day end. So I'm going to be using month start and month end in my example. So let's have month start. And what this is going to do now is it's going to take you to the first date of the month. So regardless of what day you press, it's always going to take you to that first day of the month. And with the month end, what it does is it takes you to the last day of the month. So now you have 4/10/2010 selected, so now it returns 4/30, which is the last day of the month. And a cool feature about the month start and month end of all date start and date end functions is that you could add a second parameter to either go ahead in time or go behind. So if we add a 1 as the other parameter and you press OK, you can see how the month actually increased 1 month. So you could do 2 and the month will increase by 2. And you could also go back. So if you add a negative sign in front of that number, you can see how it decreased a couple months. So another date that I like, or another function that I like using is the make date function. And the syntax for that guy is, first you have to type in the year, then the month, and then the day. And so let's say we want to make today's date August 2006. So oops, friends after. So the year 2016, 03, 08 I mean, for August, and 03 for the day. Now press OK and you can see it returns today's date. Let's say we don't have a actual day in the parameter or in the make date expression, then we are actually just going to default to the first day of the month. So that's what the make date function does by default. And if we don't have a month, it's going to default to January. So it's going to be January 1st, 2016. So let's move on to a different function, and the next function I want to talk about is the local time function. So this just uses your computer, your Windows time to tell you the current time right now. One thing to note about this function and the next function I'm going to be talking about, which is convert to local time, is that it is kind of a killer on performance since the computer is always doing something. So I don't recommend it unless you have to. So let's move on to the current local time, which is actually a really cool function that I only learned about recently. So the syntax of this is convert to local time. The first parameter is GMT, which stands for Greenwich Mean Time. And let's say we want to know what the time is in Tokyo right now. So QlikView has a built-in list of places that we could find it. If we press OK, you can see how it's tomorrow at 4:17 a.m. So let's see what the time is. Since this is QlikView, let's see what the time is in Stockholm, Sweden. So it's 9:17 p.m. in Stockholm, and let's go back and see what the time is in Hawaii for the last one. So it is 9:18 a.m. in Hawaii. So let's move on to string functions. These are some of the built-in string functions inside QlikView, and these are used to manipulate text. And all string functions can be used both in the UI and in the load script. So the first string function I want to talk about is the length function. So what the length function does is it returns just the length of characters. in whatever you choose. So let's choose the name field. And select a name, and you could see that there's 15 characters in the length of this name, so each one kind of shifts a little bit. Upper and lower, so what upper and lower does is it makes all the cases in the text either uppercase or lowercase. So if we do upper name, you can see how in the name, every single name is now uppercase. And as you get to lowercase, now all the characters in the text are just lowercase. So that's the name field, and that's the outputted text. So some other cool functions are the keep char and purge char functions. So what purge char does is it removes characters and keep char keeps characters that you want. So let's say in this name field, we don't want this field to have a comma anymore. Our syntax would be purge char the field that you want to manipulate and the text that you want to remove. So purge char, and I don't want any more commas in my field. So when we hit apply, you can see that it is the same text with just the commas removed from the list box. So as we move on to different names, you can see that it works for the entire field. And keep char is the very opposite, so it'll keep any characters that you want. So let's say we only want to show A, B, C, D, E, F. So it'd be the name field, and the second parameter would be the characters that you want. Should change the expression. Keep char. So we're only going to keep those characters now. So let's move on to the capitalize function, and what the capitalize function does is it returns words with the first character of a word capital. So let's say we have this field coming in where tomahawk is lowercase and drive is uppercase, so we want that to be capitalized. So the capitalize function, the address field, and now the T will be uppercase and the D will be uppercase. So this is a very useful function for, proper nouns, things like that. Let's move on to the mid function. So what the mid function does is it results in a string starting at the first character that you want, and then it takes the length of what you want, and this is designated in the syntax. So the syntax for that is the mid function, whatever input you would like. N1 is your starting position, and A2 is how far you want to go, like you mentioned. So let's use the name field again, and let's say we only want to take the first 3 characters of the last name. So the mid name, we want to start at the first position, we want to go 3 positions ahead. So you can see how we're only taking the first 3 characters of the name now. So it's a pretty cool function. So let's move on to the subfield function. And this is probably one of the more useful functions that I use every day. So what the subfield function does is that it takes part of a text based on a delimiter. So let's say for the name, we just want to take the last name, which is the first part before the comma. So with the subfield function, you add your name, and then you add the second part is the delimiter. So in this case, with the name field, it's a comma, and we want to take the first part of that. So we'll press OK, and now we just have last names coming through in the output. So if we change the index from a 1 to a 2, we will now just take the first name. So super useful function. Now that we know a lot of these important string functions, we could put them all together. So let's say we have the name field, and now we want to create the initials of this. So we have to put together multiple string functions in order to do that. So let's start small. So the first thing we want to do is start out with the first name. So we already have this coming in, so we have 0 here. And the next part is, if you notice after the comma, it takes all the characters after the delimiter, so there is a little space right here. So we want to add a trim function, and what that does is it eliminates any white space. So if we hit apply, you could tell that the name moved a little to the left. So what else do we have to do in order to create an initial is all we want is the first character. So we could introduce another function, which is the left function. You could also use mid in this scenario, so it'd be left. We only want to take the first character, so the parameter would be 1, and we will return a C. So as you can see, as we move up and down the names, you can see how we are just taking the first character of the first name. So let's add the second part of it, which is another subfield. Subfield name, and this time we want to take the last name. So again, our delimiter is a comma, our index is 1. So now we have the first initial of the first name and the entire last name. So we have a little more work to do. We want to just take the first character. So again, we could use the left function. And like the first name, we only want the first one. So as we move up and down the names, you can see how we're only taking the initials now. So that's it for field, date, and string functions. I hope you enjoyed my webinar. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rohan. That was really informative. We did have a couple of questions come in. The first question is, and I think you said this, but it's worth repeating, are all these functions available in Sense as well as View?
Yes, that's correct. All of these functions are available both in QlikView and QlikSense.
And probably worth repeating too, just to go over what's available in the load script as well as what's available in the UI. So just in your class functions there.
Great. So field functions, they're only available in the UI because, like I mentioned, there is no selection state in the actual load script. So get selected count or get possible count, you can't use those in the load script, but with date functions and string functions, you could use that both in the UI and in the data model load scripts.
Great, thanks. And the next question is for the get alternative count. Do you have to turn that setting on in the list box for that function to work, or can that work without that setting being turned on?
So with get alternative count, you do not need that selected. I selected that because it's easier to visualize, so regardless of if that's selected. So get alternative count, if it's not selected, either way will work when you use the actual get alternative count function. So yeah, that's just there for visual, for me to make it easier to visualize it to you.
Great, so that's always available.
And by the way, I believe in Sense, I believe it automatically does show alternatives in list boxes. I don't think you have to turn that on, but I could be wrong there, but I believe that's my understanding anyway in Sense. So, okay. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to type them in, and we'll get you some answers. That's all I have on the Q&A panel right now, Rohan. And I would thank you very much for going through all that for us and answering our questions. So just so everybody is aware, we have some additional upcoming webinars in our series. We're going to plan to do 2 webinars per month, so there should be something that will interest you. The next one is on August 11th, and that's going to talk about year-to-date and month-to-date functions. So we delve a little bit deeper into some of those date and time functions that Rohan was talking about, as well as introducing some set analysis with those to, calculating year-to-date, calculating month-to-date, year-over-year, etc. So that should be quite interesting. And then that's followed up on later on in August. We're going to have considerations for implementing QlikView on an iPad, some of the best practices from our award-winning design team. So that's something certainly to look forward to. If you're looking for previous webinars, as well as some of the forums that we've had, which have been quite interesting, you can find those on the Zone website, and that's listed there for you at the bottom of the page, thezone.infozoneus.com. So that's it. If I don't see any additional questions coming in, so thank you everybody for attending. Rohan, thanks again for the presentation. And please remember to fill out the survey at the end of this once you close the session. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.